Elena woke up, as she always did, before the first hint of dawn. The city outside her penthouse apartment was still a hushed canvas, painted in shades of charcoal and deep blue. She liked the quiet. She needed it. It was the only time the insistent hum of her own thoughts seemed to dim just a little. Her routine was a fortress, an unyielding structure built to keep everything out, and sometimes, she suspected, to keep everything in. A quick shower, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus filling the steam. Then strong black coffee, brewed exactly right, sipped in silence while she reviewed the day's schedule on her tablet. Elena was an architect, a very successful one. Her designs were sleek, modern, almost stark, much like her life, she sometimes thought, with a faint, unacknowledged pang. She drove to her office, a gleaming tower she herself had designed, through streets that were just beginning to wake up. The morning rush was a blur of noise and hurried faces. She saw none of them, not really. Her focus was always inward, on the next deadline, the next design, the next project that would fill the empty spaces on her calendar, and perhaps for a fleeting moment, the empty spaces inside her. Lunch was usually a salad at her desk, or sometimes, if she felt particularly drained, she'd walk to a small upscale cafe nearby. She'd sit by herself, observing the other diners, their laughter, their conversations, a world she felt increasingly detached from. She'd nod politely if someone greeted her, offer a tight smile, and retreat back into her own thoughts. Years had passed this way. Decades even. Elena was in her late 40s now, a woman who had achieved everything she had set out to achieve, a woman who had built an empire of glass and steel, but an empire, she often realized, that felt hollow. Like a beautiful empty shell. And then there was the memory. It wasn't always at the forefront of her mind, but it was always there, like a stone in her shoe, a persistent, quiet discomfort that never truly went away. It was a memory from long ago, from a time when she was much younger, much sharper, much more unyielding. She had been in her early 20s, fresh out of university, full of ambition and a fierce determination to prove herself. She had been working late, as usual, at her first big firm. It was a cold evening. Rain lashed against the windows. As she left the office, pulling her coat tighter around her, she saw her. An old woman, small, hunched, her clothes threadbare and damp. The woman stood by the entrance, her eyes scanning the faces of the people leaving. Elena tried to walk past quickly, to avoid eye contact. She was in a hurry. She was tired. She had things to do. But the woman spoke. Her voice was soft, raspy, barely a whisper. "Please, miss," she'd said, "just a little something. I haven't eaten all day. My son, he's sick. Just a little food for him." Elena remembered the exact words, the way the woman's eyes had pleaded, and she remembered her own response. The words had come out sharp, almost cruel. "I don't have time for this," she'd snapped. "Go to a shelter, or find a job. Everyone has problems. Don't bother me." She had walked away, her heels clicking loudly on the wet pavement, the sound echoing the harshness of her own voice. She hadn't looked back. Not once. She had convinced herself she was right, that she was busy, that she couldn't solve everyone's problems, that the woman was probably just trying to take advantage, but the image of the old woman's face, her pleading eyes, her trembling hands, had stayed with her. It would resurface at unexpected moments. When she saw an elderly person struggling, when she heard a story about hardship, when she looked in the mirror and saw the success she had built, but felt the coldness that came with it. Today, for some reason, the memory was particularly vivid. It clung to her, a shadow on her perfect, polished life. She finished her salad. Her usual cafe felt too bright, too loud. An unfamiliar restlessness stirred within her. Instead of heading back to the office, she found herself walking in a different direction, down a side street she rarely frequented, past storefronts she'd never noticed before. And then she saw it, a small, unassuming bookstore. Its windows were dusty, filled with stacks of old, worn paperbacks. It looked out of place in this modern part of the city, an anachronism. She paused, a strange pull drawing her towards its quiet entrance. She wasn't a reader, not really, not anymore. But something made her push open the heavy wooden door. A faint scent of old paper and dust greeted her. The interior was dim, packed floor to ceiling with books. It was a labyrinth of stories. And in the very back, behind a counter piled high with even more books, sat a man. He was older, with kind eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of unspoken wisdom. His hair was silver, neatly combed. He wore a simple, dark sweater. He wasn't reading. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, as if waiting. Elena felt a strange sensation, a feeling of being seen, truly seen. Not as the successful architect, not as the woman who built towers, but as something else, something much more vulnerable. He didn't speak immediately. He simply raised his head, his gaze meeting hers across the dim, quiet room. And in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, Elena felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it was recognition, as if she had been walking towards this moment, towards this quiet man, her entire life. And then a soft, gentle voice broke the silence. "Welcome," he said, his voice like the rustle of old pages. "It's not often we see new faces in here. Are you looking for anything in particular?" Elena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed composure had suddenly, completely vanished. She just stood there, lost in the quiet gaze of this stranger, feeling a deep, unsettling tremor run through her. What was happening to her, and why, in this dusty, forgotten place, did she feel like her entire world was about to shift? Elena stood frozen. The question, "Are you looking for anything in particular?" hung in the air, gentle but profound. It wasn't just about books, she realized. It felt like he was asking if she was looking for something deeper. Something she couldn't even name. Her mind raced. This wasn't her. This wasn't the composed, efficient Elena everyone knew. She was supposed to be back at her office, reviewing blueprints, making decisions, not standing in a dusty old bookstore, speechless, in front of a complete stranger. She tried to form words, to say, "No, I just wandered in," or "I made a mistake." But her throat felt tight. Her voice, usually so firm and clear, was trapped somewhere deep inside. The man behind the counter didn't press her. He just watched her, his kind eyes holding a patience she rarely encountered, a patience that felt both comforting and incredibly unsettling, as if he understood her silence, as if he had heard it before. Eleanor found herself taking a step deeper into the store. The scent of old paper filled her lungs. It was a smell that spoke of forgotten stories, of lives lived and recorded, a stark contrast to the sterile new smell of her own architectural creations. "No," she finally managed to whisper, the word barely audible. Not really. I just saw the sign." It was a lie. She hadn't even noticed the sign. She had simply been drawn in. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Sometimes," he said, his voice still soft, "we don't know what we're looking for until we find it, or until it finds us." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. His words felt too precise, too close to the truth she had been avoiding for so long. She scanned the shelves, pretending to be interested in the titles, but her mind was reeling. Who was this man? And why did his simple presence make her feel so exposed? She remembered the memory again, the old woman, the rain, her own sharp words. "Don't bother me." The memory felt heavier now, intensified by the quiet stillness of the bookstore. It was a shame, a regret, that had burrowed deep into her heart, festering there unnoticed by anyone but herself. All these years she had built walls, walls of success, of hard work, of detachment. She had convinced herself that she was strong, that she was independent, that she didn't need anyone and no one needed her. But the truth was, she had been trying to outrun that moment, that single cruel moment when she had denied someone in need, a mother asking for food for her sick son. The man cleared his throat gently. "Would you care for some tea?" he offered. "I always have a pot brewing. It helps with reflection, you know." Reflection. The word hung in the air, perfectly aligned with her spiraling thoughts. Elena looked at him. He wasn't smiling broadly, but there was a warmth in his eyes, a genuine kindness that disarmed her. She found herself nodding, an automatic response that surprised even herself. She never accepted offers from strangers, especially not hot tea in a dusty bookstore. He gestured towards a small, worn wooden table tucked away in a corner, bathed in a soft beam of sunlight filtering through a high window. There were two mismatched chairs. It looked inviting, like a secret place. As he moved to fetch the tea, Elena walked towards the table. Her steps felt lighter, yet heavier at the same time. Lighter because she was doing something completely out of her structured routine. Heavier because she felt the weight of her own past pressing down on her. She sat down, her fingers tracing the worn grain of the wooden table. The air was filled not just with the smell of old books, but now a faint soothing aroma of herbal tea. He returned with two steaming mugs, placing one in front of her. "Chamomile," he said, "good for the nerves." He sat opposite her, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't push for conversation. He simply sat, sipping his tea, his gaze occasionally resting on her, a silent invitation to simply be. Eleanor picked up the mug. The warmth seeped into her hands. She took a sip. It was gentle, comforting. And for the first time in she didn't know how long, she felt a strange sense of peace begin to settle over her. A fragile, unfamiliar peace. She looked at the man. He wasn't doing anything remarkable, just sitting there, drinking tea. But his presence was profound. It was as if he held a key to something she had locked away. "You seem troubled," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "A heavy heart, perhaps?" Elena's eyes widened. How could he know? She had spent years perfecting the art of concealing her inner turmoil. She was an expert at presenting a strong, unshakable front to the world. Yet this man, this quiet stranger in this forgotten bookstore, saw right through it. A sudden, overwhelming urge to speak, to confess, to unburden herself, rose within her. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in decades, a feeling so raw, so potent, it almost brought tears to her eyes. Who was this man, and what power did he hold to crack open the carefully constructed shell of Elena's life with just a few gentle words and a cup of tea? Elena stared at the man, the chamomile tea warming her hands, but a chill running through her heart. A heavy heart, perhaps? His words echoed in the quiet bookstore, stripping away her defenses. It was as if he could see the memory, the shame, the regret that had been her constant silent companion. She wanted to deny it, to pull back into her shell, to rebuild the walls. But something in his gaze, a profound understanding, held her captive. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, something ancient. I don't know what you mean," she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. It was a weak defense, even to her own ears. The man smiled gently. "We all carry burdens, my dear, some visible, some hidden deep within, the weight of our choices, the echoes of our past. They shape us, don't they?" Elena looked down at her mug. The steam rising from the tea seemed to blur her vision. He spoke of choices, of echoes, And suddenly, the memory of that cold, rainy night was no longer a distant whisper. It was a roar. She saw the old woman's face again, so clearly, the desperation in her eyes, the way her thin hands had reached out. Just a little food for my sick son. And Elena's own cruel dismissal. Don't bother me. The words felt like daggers, piercing her own heart now, decades later. She had been so young, so driven, so intent on her own path. She had seen the world as a place of competition, where weakness was to be avoided, and success was the only measure of worth. She had believed that empathy was a luxury she couldn't afford, that helping others would somehow derail her own ascent. It was a belief system that had served her well in a way. It had propelled her to the top of her field. She had built a formidable career. But what had she lost along the way? What part of herself had she sacrificed? A single tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. She hadn't cried in years. Not truly. Not like this. The man didn't comment on her tear. He simply continued to look at her, his presence a silent anchor in her emotional storm. "Sometimes," he said, his voice still soft, "the smallest kindness can make the biggest difference, not just for the receiver, but for the giver." Elena thought about that. The smallest kindness. A moment of compassion, a simple act of sharing. She had withheld it. She had chosen harshness instead, and the consequences of that choice had rippled through her own life, creating a void she couldn't fill with all her achievements. I did something terrible once," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. It was a whisper, a confession offered to the quiet air, to the old books, and to the patient man across from her. "Many years ago, I was young, and I was cruel." She recounted the story, the old woman, the plea for food, her own sharp words, the way she had walked away without a second glance. As she spoke, the weight lifted, just a fraction. It was still heavy, but now it was shared. The man listened, his expression unwavering. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He simply absorbed her words, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding. When she finished, the silence in the bookstore felt different. It was no longer unsettling, it was accepting. "And it has stayed with you," he observed, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight again. "Every now and then, it comes back. And today, it was just too much." She looked at him, her eyes pleading for something she couldn't articulate, for forgiveness, for understanding, for a way to undo what had been done. "Regret," he said, "is a powerful teacher. It shows us where our hearts truly lie. It shows us the path we wish we had taken." He paused, taking another sip of his tea. "But regret alone is not enough. It must lead to something more." "But what more?" Elena asked, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. "How can I undo it? The woman, she's probably long gone. Her son, I don't even know if he was really sick. I don't know anything. I just know what I did." The man leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying, yet remaining gentle. "You cannot change the past, my dear, but you can change its meaning. You can choose how it shapes you from this moment forward." Elena felt a glimmer of something. Hope, a possibility she hadn't considered. But it felt so abstract, so impossible. How could she change the meaning of such a cold, hard truth? "I don't understand," she admitted, feeling utterly lost. He reached across the table, his hand gently resting on hers, momentarily covering it. His touch was warm, comforting, and yet it sent another jolt through her. It was a touch that felt incredibly familiar, though she knew she had never met him before. "Sometimes," he said, his voice dropping to an even softer whisper, The path to healing begins with a single step, a willingness to open your heart again, to see the world and yourself with new eyes. He then slowly withdrew his hand. Elena felt the warmth linger on her skin. She looked at him, searching his face for answers, for guidance. He seemed to know so much, to understand so deeply. Who was he? This quiet man, in this forgotten bookstore, who had somehow managed to peel back layers of her carefully constructed life with just a few gentle words. And then, just as she was about to ask, just as she was about to demand to know who he truly was, he simply stood up. "It's getting late," he said, his voice returning to its normal, calm tone. "Perhaps you should go, but I think you'll find your way back here soon." Elena watched him, a knot forming in her stomach. He was dismissing her, just like that, after everything she had just revealed. After he had opened up this raw, painful wound within her, she wanted to protest, she wanted to stay, she wanted more answers, but he was already turning, walking back towards his counter, blending into the shadows of the countless books. She was left alone at the small wooden table, the half-empty mug of chamomile tea growing cold. The bookstore suddenly felt vast, echoing with her unspoken questions. She stood up slowly, feeling a profound sense of disorientation. She walked towards the door, her mind a whirlwind. As she reached the exit, she glanced back. The man was behind his counter again, his head bowed as if deep in thought. He didn't look up. Elena hesitated, then pushed open the door and stepped out into the bustling city street. The noise, the lights, the rush of people. It all felt overwhelming after the quiet sanctuary she had just left. She walked, almost in a daze, back towards her office, her carefully structured world now feeling utterly fractured. The memory of the old woman was still vivid, but now, mixed with the strange, unsettling encounter with the bookseller, she felt raw, exposed, and deeply, profoundly confused. What did he mean she would find her way back, and what exactly was she supposed to do next, with this awakened pain and the unsettling feeling that her life, as she knew it, was about to change irrevocably? The days that followed her visit to the bookstore were unlike any Elena had experienced in years. Her perfectly ordered world felt askew. The sharp edges of her routine seemed to have softened, blurring the lines of her carefully constructed life. The memory of the old woman, once a dull ache, now pulsed with a vivid, almost unbearable clarity. And woven into it was the image of the quiet bookseller, his kind eyes, his gentle words, his knowing gaze. She tried to shake it off. She immersed herself in work, longer hours, more complex designs. But her focus was fractured. Her mind kept drifting back to that dusty shop, to the scent of old paper, to the warmth of the chamomile tea, and to the unsettling feeling that she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in forever. The bookseller's words, "You cannot change the past, my dear, but you can change its meaning," resonated within her. What did that mean exactly? How could she change the meaning of such a painful, irreversible act? One afternoon, a week after her visit, Eleanor found herself driving past a construction site, one of her own designs taking shape. It was a massive, modern structure, sleek and impressive. She should have felt a surge of pride. Instead, she felt a strange hollowness. All this glass and steel, all this ambition. For what? Her gaze drifted to a small group of construction workers taking a break. They sat on makeshift benches, sharing simple meals from lunchboxes, laughing, talking. One older man, his face weathered, carefully unwrapped a sandwich and offered half to a younger colleague who looked tired and worn. The younger man smiled, a genuine, grateful smile, a small act of kindness, a simple sharing of food. The scene struck Elena with an unexpected force. It was so ordinary, so human, and it brought back the old woman's plea, "Just a little food for my sick son." Elena's stomach tightened with guilt. She had had so much to give, and she had given nothing. That night she couldn't sleep. The silence of her penthouse felt oppressive. She walked to the window, looking out at the glittering cityscape. Each light represented a life, a story, and she felt utterly alone in her own. The next morning, driven by an impulse she couldn't explain, she found herself making a detour on her way to work. She drove down the side street. And there it was, the unassuming bookstore, its dusty windows glowing faintly in the morning light. She hesitated. Her professional self screamed at her to keep driving, to stick to her schedule, to ignore this strange, unsettling pull. But a deeper, quieter voice urged her forward, a voice that had been silent for too long. She parked her car and walked towards the door. Her heart was pounding. She felt like an imposter, returning to a place that held such a profound secret about her. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. The scent of old books greeted her, comforting this time, not unsettling. The store was quiet, bathed in the soft morning light, and there he was, the bookseller, behind his counter just as before. He looked up, and a gentle smile touched his lips. "Welcome back," he said, his voice warm. "I thought you might return." Eleanor felt a blush creep up her neck. He had known. He had sensed her internal struggle, her eventual return. She walked towards the small table in the corner, almost automatically. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said," she admitted, her voice softer than usual, "about changing the meaning of the past." He gestured for her to sit, and then went to fetch the tea. This time, there was no question. It was an unspoken ritual. He returned with 2 mugs, the familiar aroma of chamomile filling the air. He sat opposite her, his gaze patient and open. "The past is a fixed point, yes," he began, his voice thoughtful. "But its shadow can either darken our present or illuminate a new path forward. It depends on what we choose to do with it." Elena took a sip of her tea. "But how? How do I change the meaning of something I can't undo? I can't find that woman. I can't apologize. I can't give her son food now." Her voice was filled with a raw, desperate frustration. The bookseller listened, his eyes holding a deep compassion. "You are right. You cannot undo that specific act. But the regret you feel, that pain, it is a seed of understanding, a seed of compassion that has been watered by your memory." He paused, letting his words sink in. "What if," he continued, "instead of letting that regret consume you, you let it guide you? What if you use that awakened compassion to ensure that no one else suffers the same way? What if you became the person who offers that small kindness, that simple meal to someone else in need?" Elena looked at him, truly seeing him now. Not just a bookseller, but someone who spoke with a wisdom that transcended the ordinary. His words were simple, yet profound. They resonated deep within her, stirring something that had been dormant for so long. "But where would I even start?" she asked, the question laced with a tentative hope. "I don't even know how to do that anymore." He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "The world is full of opportunities for kindness, Eleanor. You just have to open your eyes to them, and open your heart." He reached across the table and placed a small, worn paperback in front of her. It had a simple, unadorned cover. "Perhaps," he said, "this will give you a starting point. It's a collection of stories. Stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary ways to help each other." Elena picked up the book. Its pages felt soft, worn from many hands. She looked at the title. It was simply The Unseen Hand. A strange title, she thought, but as she held it, she felt a faint warmth spread through her, a warmth that felt like a promise of a different path. She looked up at the bookseller, a question forming on her lips, a question about who he was and how he knew so much. But before she could speak, he simply nodded, as if reading her thoughts. "Go," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Read, and then, when you are ready, you will know what to do." Elena knew in that moment that her life was truly changing. The polished, sterile world she had built was cracking open, and in its place a seed of compassion was beginning to sprout. A seed nurtured by a stranger's wisdom and by the painful echo of a choice she had made long ago. The thought of what lay ahead, of what this new path might entail, was daunting, yes, but for the first time in a very long time, it was also filled with a strange, quiet hope. She walked out of the bookstore that day, not with answers, but with a book, a new perspective, and the unsettling yet comforting feeling that she was no longer alone in her journey. If this message is for you, comment Amen. Elena carried the unseen hand with her everywhere. It was a small, unassuming book, its pages soft with age, its cover worn smooth. It felt like a secret, a quiet companion in her otherwise bustling public life. She started reading it that very evening. Tucked away in her quiet penthouse, the city lights twinkling outside, she opened the first page. The stories weren't grand tales of heroism or dramatic rescues. They were simple accounts. A neighbor sharing a meal with a lonely, elderly person. A stranger offering a kind word to someone struggling on the street. A child leaving a flower on a discarded bench. Each story, told in plain, heartfelt language, was a small ripple of kindness. And each ripple seemed to wash over Elena, softening the hardened edges of her own heart. She saw the profound impact these small gestures had, not just on the people receiving them, but on the givers too. They weren't about changing the world in one sweeping act. They were about changing one moment, one heart, at a time. The book became a mirror. It showed her the person she had been, cold, detached, self-absorbed, and it showed her the person she could be. The regret about the old woman didn't disappear, but it began to transform. It wasn't just a heavy stone anymore. It was a compass, pointing her towards a different direction. Her first attempt at kindness was awkward, painfully so. She was at her regular upscale cafe, waiting for her usual black coffee. A young barista, new to the job, was visibly struggling with a complex order, her hands trembling slightly. Elena, in her old life, would have simply sighed impatiently, perhaps even offered a sharp glance, but the stories from the unseen hand were fresh in her mind. "It's all right," Elena found herself saying, her voice a little stiff. "Take your time. There's no rush." The barista looked up, surprised. Her eyes, wide with stress, met Elena's. "Oh, thank you, ma'am," she mumbled, a faint blush on her cheeks. "I'm still learning." Elena managed a small, hesitant smile. "We all are," she replied. It felt strange to say, unnatural. But when she received her coffee, the barista gave her a genuinely grateful smile, and Elena felt a tiny, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small crack in the fortress she had built around herself. Over the next few days, she tried other small things. She held the door open for a colleague, a gesture she usually left to others. She complimented the cleaning staff on their hard work, something she had never done before. She even bought an extra sandwich at lunch and quietly left it on a public bench, hoping someone who needed it would find it. Each act felt a little less awkward than the last. Each time she expected to feel silly or exposed. Instead, she felt lighter. The heavy stone in her heart, while still there, felt less burdensome. It was as if these small acts of giving were slowly chipping away at its weight. Her colleagues noticed, subtly. Her assistant, a young woman named Maya, looked at her with a new curiosity. "Miss Vance," Maya said one afternoon, "you seem different lately. In a good way." Elena just offered a small, knowing smile. She couldn't explain it to Maya. How could she tell her that a dusty book and a quiet bookseller were dismantling her entire world view? The internal struggle was still very real. There were moments when the old, cynical Elena would resurface. "This is pointless," a voice in her head would say. "You're just trying to make yourself feel better. It doesn't change anything." But then she would remember the bookseller's words. "You cannot change the past, my dear, but you can change its meaning." And she would remember the old woman's face. The memory, instead of paralyzing her with guilt, now spurred her to action. It was a difficult shift. It was like learning to walk again, but with a new set of values, a new way of seeing the world. She started to notice things she had previously ignored. The elderly woman struggling with groceries on the street corner, the young mother trying to calm a crying child on the bus, the tired eyes of the homeless man she passed every morning. Before, they were just background noise. Now they were individuals, each with their own story, their own struggles. One evening, as she was leaving her office, she saw the building's night security guard, Mr. Henderson, sitting alone in the lobby. He was an older man, quiet and always polite. Eleanor usually just offered a quick nod. But tonight she paused. "Good evening, Mr. Henderson," she said, surprising herself. "Long night ahead?" He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Oh, Miss Vance, yes, ma'am, just another quiet one." He offered a small, tired smile. Eleanor felt a sudden, unexpected urge. "Would you like a coffee?" she asked, without thinking. "I was just about to grab one. I could bring you one back." Mr. Henderson's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you don't have to, Miss Vance. Really?" "Nonsense," Eleanor insisted, a new confidence in her voice. "It's no trouble at all. How do you take it?" As she walked to the nearby coffee shop, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about the connection, about truly seeing someone and offering a small, unsolicited kindness. She felt a profound sense of purpose in that simple act. When she returned, Mr. Henderson was still sitting there, but his posture seemed a little less weary. He took the coffee with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Vance," he said, his voice soft. "That's very kind of you, more than you know." Eleanor smiled, a real smile this time, not a tight, polite one, a genuine, heartfelt smile. She felt something shift inside her, a deep, quiet joy. As she drove home, she thought about the bookseller. She hadn't seen him since her last visit, but his influence, through the book and his words, was undeniably guiding her. She wondered if he knew the profound changes he had set in motion. She wondered if he was watching. The next morning, Eleanor woke up with a new feeling, not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something positive. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She saw the same successful architect, but now there was a softness around her eyes, a hint of something warm and alive. She knew she needed to go back to the bookstore. She needed to tell him. But as she prepared for her day, a thought struck her. What if she wasn't ready to just tell him? What if she needed to show him? What if her real transformation needed a bigger stage, a more meaningful action than just a cup of coffee or a kind word? "If you receive this, type, 'I receive it.'" She felt a pull, a quiet but insistent urge to seek out the kind of people the old woman and her son represented, to find a way to truly make amends, not just for her own peace, but for the world. And she wondered, with a growing sense of anticipation, where that urge would lead her next. Elena's life began to revolve around a new kind of architecture, not buildings of glass and steel, but bridges of connection and compassion. The small acts of kindness she had started with were no longer enough. The seed the bookseller had planted, watered by the unseen hand, and her own growing empathy, was now pushing for deeper roots. The memory of the old woman and her sick son became a constant, gentle reminder. It wasn't a burden anymore, but a quiet, insistent call to action. She wanted to find people like them, people who were struggling, unseen, unheard. She wanted to offer the kindness she had so cruelly withheld all those years ago. Her first step was research, practical, systematic, just like her architectural training. She looked up local charities, soup kitchens, and homeless shelters. She read articles, watched documentaries. The sheer scale of need in her own city, a city she had always viewed through the lens of her own success, was overwhelming. It made her realize how blind she had been. She decided to start small, with a local soup kitchen downtown. It was an old building, tucked away in a less affluent part of the city, a place she had never ventured into before. The first time she went, she dressed simply, leaving her expensive suits and designer accessories at home. She felt nervous, like an outsider. She was used to being in control, leading, designing. Here she was just a volunteer. The smells of warm food, mixed with the faint scent of disinfectant and humanity, filled the air. The room was bustling with people, volunteers and those seeking a meal. Elena felt a pang of awkwardness. She didn't know what to do. She felt out of place, her hands, accustomed to sketching and typing, suddenly feeling clumsy and unsure. A kindly woman with a warm smile, the kitchen manager, noticed her hesitation. "First time, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle. Elena nodded, a little embarrassed. "Yes, I just wanted to help." "Well, you've come to the right place," the manager said. "We always need an extra pair of hands. Can you help with serving, or maybe clear tables?" Elena chose serving. She found herself behind a counter, ladling out hearty stew, her movements stiff at first. She tried to avoid eye contact, feeling a familiar urge to retreat. But then she saw a young woman, no older than 20, holding a small child. The child looked frail, their eyes wide and hungry. The woman murmured a thank you, her voice almost identical to the old woman's whisper from so long ago. It was a jolt, a sudden, visceral connection to her past. This young mother, this hungry child, they were echoes. They were her chance to rewrite the meaning of her own history. Elena met the young woman's eyes, and this time, instead of turning away, she offered a genuine warm smile. "Please," she said, her voice soft, "take as much as you need. And there's some bread and fruit, too." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much." In that moment, Elena felt a profound shift within her. The guilt didn't vanish entirely, but it transformed into something else, a fierce determination to help, to truly help. It wasn't about self-flagellation anymore. It was about connection, about dignity, about ensuring that no other mother and child would ever experience the kind of dismissal she had once inflicted. She started volunteering regularly at the soup kitchen. At first, she was quiet, observing, but slowly she began to engage. She learned names, she heard stories. She saw the resilience, the struggles, and the quiet dignity of the people who came through the doors. She realized that hunger wasn't just about food. It was about respect, about being seen, about having a place. Her reputation as the formidable architect began to soften. Her colleagues noticed her changing priorities. She was still dedicated to her work, but there was a new depth to her, a newfound empathy that radiated from her, even in the boardroom. She started subtly incorporating elements of community and social responsibility into her architectural proposals, designing spaces that weren't just beautiful, but truly served people. One evening, after a particularly busy shift at the soup kitchen, Eleanor was walking to her car. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, a fulfilling tiredness. She passed a small park, dimly lit, and there, sitting alone on a bench, was an older man. He looked lost, his head in his hands. Elena hesitated. Her old self would have walked past, minding her own business. But the new Elena, the one shaped by the bookseller and the unseen hand and the faces in the soup kitchen, couldn't. She approached him slowly. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Are you all right? Is there anything I can do?" The man looked up, startled. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with despair. I just don't know where to go," he mumbled, his voice cracking. "Lost my job. Lost my apartment. Everything." Elena's heart ached. This was it. This was the moment. The chance to offer the kindness she had once denied. She sat down next to him, not too close, but close enough to show she was truly there. "It's going to be okay," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "There are places that can help, people who care. I know a place, a soup kitchen, where you can get a hot meal and they can connect you with resources. I can take you there now if you'd like." The man looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He seemed surprised by her offer, by her presence. You would do that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena nodded, a profound sense of purpose settling over her. "Yes," she said, "I would. We all need a little help sometimes." As she led him towards her car, Elena felt a connection to the bookseller, to the old woman, to all the stories in The Unseen Hand. She realized that her journey was not just about making amends for the past, but about building a future where compassion was not an exception, but a way of life. She had found her new architecture, and it was built on empathy, on connection, on the quiet, powerful strength of human kindness. She still hadn't returned to the bookstore, but she knew deep in her heart that she was living the message he had given her. And she wondered, as she drove the man to the shelter, if he knew, somehow, that she was finally stepping into the light. Elena's transformation continued, deep and profound. It wasn't just about volunteering anymore. It was about seeing the world through a different lens. Her work, her relationships, even her perception of herself. Everything was touched by this new, awakened compassion. She became a fierce advocate for the marginalized. She used her skills as an architect to design more efficient, more humane spaces for shelters and community centers. She leveraged her network to raise funds, to connect people in need with resources, to bring attention to the issues she had once ignored. She was still Elena Vance, the successful architect, but now she was also Elena Vance, the unwavering champion for dignity and hope. The change in her was palpable. Her sharp edges had softened, replaced by a quiet strength and a genuine warmth that drew people to her. Her assistant, Maya, became her confidant, often joining her at the soup kitchen or helping with community projects. Colleagues who had once found her intimidating now sought her out, not just for professional advice, but for her perspective, her quiet wisdom. The memory of the old woman, the one that had haunted her for so long, now felt different. It was still there, a poignant reminder of a past mistake, but it no longer crippled her with guilt. Instead, it fueled her. It was a constant source of motivation, a silent vow to never again turn away from someone in need. It had become, as the bookseller had said, a path to healing. One rainy afternoon, much like that fateful day decades ago, Elena was driving home from a meeting. The city was a blur of grey and reflections. She stopped at a traffic light, her gaze drifting to the sidewalk. And there, huddled under a bus stop shelter, was a young woman, her face pale, her clothes thin. She held a small child wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Elena's heart clenched. It was an almost exact replica of the scene that had tormented her for years. The rain, the cold, the vulnerable mother and child. A test, she thought, a profound, undeniable test. Without a second thought, Elena pulled her car over, ignoring the honking horns behind her. She grabbed her emergency blanket from the trunk, a warm, soft one she kept for unexpected situations. She also had a bag with some snacks and a bottle of water she always carried. She walked towards the bus stop, her steps firm and purposeful. The young woman looked up, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Excuse me," Elena said, her voice gentle and steady. "It's too cold for you and your child to be out here. Please take this blanket, and here, some food and water." The young woman stared at her, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, so similar to the old woman's plea. "Thank you so much. My little one, he's so cold." Elena knelt down, careful not to alarm the child. "Where are you headed?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. "Is there somewhere safe you can go?" The woman shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. "No, we just got evicted. No family here. Nowhere to go." Elena felt a surge of compassion, so strong it almost brought her to her knees. This was not just a chance to right a past wrong. It was a chance to extend a hand of grace, to be the unseen hand she had read about. "Please," Elena said, her voice firm, "come with me. I know a shelter, a safe place. They will help you. They will give you warmth and food and connect you to resources, and I will make sure you get there safely." The young woman hesitated, her gaze searching Elena's face for any hint of insincerity, but she saw only genuine care, a profound empathy. Slowly, she nodded, her eyes filled with a fragile hope. As Elena helped the woman and her child into her warm car, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't just satisfaction. It was a deep, quiet joy. A sense of profound rightness. She was no longer just an architect building structures. She was building bridges of hope. She was weaving a new tapestry of grace, one thread at a time. As she drove to the shelter, the rain still falling, Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. The old woman's face, once a source of torment, now appeared in her mind, not as an accusation, but as a gentle guide. She had come full circle. She had finally understood the bookseller's words. She hadn't changed the past, but she had definitively changed its meaning. She knew in that moment that she was ready. Ready to go back to the bookstore, ready to tell the quiet man what he had helped her to become, ready to thank him for opening her eyes and her heart. The thought filled her with a profound sense of anticipation. She wondered what he would say. She wondered if he would smile, that gentle, knowing smile. And she wondered, with a quiet certainty, what new wisdom he might impart, now that she had truly embraced the path of kindness. If this message is for you, comment Amen. The next morning, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't known was possible. The weight of decades of unresolved guilt had finally lifted. She had not only faced her past, but had actively worked to redeem it, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, heartfelt action. The young mother and child from the previous night were safely settled at the shelter, and Elena had already begun to arrange further assistance for them. Her first stop that day was not her office, but the quiet side street where the bookstore resided. The rain had cleared, leaving the city air fresh and clean. The sun cast long, gentle shadows, illuminating the dusty windows of the shop with a soft glow. Her heart beat with a mix of anticipation and a strange kind of peace. She wasn't seeking answers anymore. She was seeking connection, to share her journey, to express her gratitude. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. The familiar scent of old paper and dust enveloped her. The store was quiet, bathed in the morning light, and there he was, the bookseller, behind his counter, just as she remembered him. He looked up, and a gentle smile touched his lips, as if he had been expecting her all along. "Welcome back, Elena," he said, his voice soft, warm, and filled with a quiet knowing. Hearing him say her name so simply, so directly, sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the formal Ms. Vance she was accustomed to. It was personal, intimate. And then he said my name. Elena walked towards the counter, her gaze unwavering. "You knew I'd come back," she stated, not as a question, but as a realization. He nodded, his eyes twinkling gently. "Some paths, once started, have a way of leading back to their origin point, don't they? Especially when the heart finds its true direction." Elena felt a surge of emotion. I came to thank you," she began, her voice a little choked. "For everything, for the book, for your words, for opening my eyes." She recounted her journey. The small acts of kindness, the volunteering at the soup kitchen, the transformation in her work, and finally, the encounter with the young mother and child in the rain. As she spoke, the words flowed easily, openly, from a place of genuine gratitude and a newfound humility. The bookseller listened, his gaze unwavering, his expression one of profound understanding. He didn't interrupt, he didn't offer advice, he simply listened, a silent, comforting presence. "That day," Elena finished, her voice soft, "when I helped that woman and her child, it was like a circle completing itself. The regret, the pain, it finally lifted. It became purpose." She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You said I couldn't change the past, but I could change its meaning. I think I finally understand what you meant." He smiled, a deep, gentle smile that seemed to reach into the very depths of her soul. "Indeed, Elena, you chose compassion over regret. You chose grace over bitterness. And in doing so, you not only healed a part of yourself, but became a source of healing for others." Eleanor felt a profound sense of validation. His words were like a balm to her soul. She looked around the quiet bookstore, at the countless stories held within its walls, and she looked at the man, this enigmatic stranger who had so subtly, yet so profoundly, guided her. "Who are you?" she asked, the question finally escaping her lips, filled with a desperate curiosity. "How did you know? How did you see so much in me, when I couldn't even see it myself?" The bookseller's smile deepened. He paused, his gaze meeting hers, a silent moment stretching between them. The air in the bookstore seemed to shimmer, to hold a quiet, sacred energy. "My identity, Elena, is not as important as the message you received," he said, his voice still gentle, but with an underlying resonance that filled the quiet space. "I am simply a keeper of stories, and a witness to the transformations that unfold when a heart chooses to open. The wisdom was always within you. I merely helped you find the key." He then reached under the counter and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. It looked ancient, its cover worn smooth with age. He opened it to a blank page and handed her a pen. "Your journey, Elena, is now a story of its own," he said. "A story of hope, of transformation, of grace. It is a story that needs to be shared. Write it down, not for me, but for yourself, and perhaps one day for others who might be lost, just as you once were." Elena took the journal and the pen. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the blank page, then back at the bookseller. His eyes held an infinite depth, a quiet understanding that seemed to encompass all the pain and beauty of the world. "But will I see you again?" she asked, a sudden fear gripping her, a fear of losing this anchor, this guide. He simply smiled, a knowing, serene smile. You will always find me, Elena, in the quiet places of your heart, in every act of kindness you extend, in every life you touch, and when you are ready to share your story, the way will be clear." He then gestured towards the door, a silent invitation for her to leave. Elena felt a pang of sadness, a reluctance to depart from this sanctuary, from this man who had changed her life. But there was also a profound sense of empowerment. She wasn't leaving empty-handed. She was leaving with a full heart, a clear purpose, and a story waiting to be told. As she turned to go, she glanced back one last time. The bookseller was standing behind his counter, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on her. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He simply watched her, a silent blessing in his eyes. And in that moment, Elena felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She stepped out of the bookstore into the bright morning light, ready to write her story, knowing that she was not alone, and that the unseen hand had truly touched her life. Elena began to write. The leather-bound journal became her confidant, holding the raw, honest narrative of her transformation. She wrote about the coldness of her early life, the sharp words she had uttered, the crushing weight of guilt. She wrote about the chance encounter in the dusty bookstore, the quiet wisdom of the bookseller, and the gentle guidance of the unseen hand. And she wrote about the profound joy and purpose she found in serving others, in becoming the person she was always meant to be. The act of writing was cathartic. It allowed her to process her journey, to see the intricate threads that had woven together to create her new path. She realized that her past, even the painful parts, was not something to be erased, but something to be understood, to be integrated. It was the foundation upon which her new life was being built. Her architectural firm also began to transform. Elena initiated a new division dedicated to community-focused projects. They designed sustainable, dignified housing for the homeless. They created welcoming, functional spaces for soup kitchens and educational centers. Her designs, once stark and purely aesthetic, now pulsed with a new warmth, a consideration for the human spirit that resonated deeply with her clients and her team. Maya, her assistant, was instrumental in this new direction. She shared Elena's passion, and together they became a formidable force for positive change in the city. Elena found herself surrounded by a team that was not just professionally competent, but genuinely compassionate. The sterile, competitive environment of her old firm began to blossom into a collaborative, purpose-driven community. Elena also became a mentor. She sought out young architects, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, and offered them guidance, support, and opportunities. She shared her story not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of how one can always choose to change, to grow, to find meaning beyond personal ambition. Her influence spread. Other businesses in the city, inspired by her firm's initiatives, began to explore their own social responsibility projects. The ripple effect of her transformation was tangible. The city, once seen by Eleanor as merely a backdrop for her own success, now felt like a living, breathing entity, a community she was actively helping to nurture and uplift. Yet, amidst all this activity, Eleanor maintained a quiet inner life. She often found herself returning to the small wooden table in her mind, sipping chamomile tea with the bookseller. His words, his gentle presence, remained a constant source of inspiration. She understood now that his identity didn't matter. He was a catalyst, a mirror, a guiding light. He was the unseen hand that had set her on her true path. She never saw him again in the physical sense. The bookstore remained, a silent landmark on the side street. Sometimes she would drive past, glancing at its dusty windows, feeling a pang of nostalgia, a quiet gratitude, but she didn't feel the need to go in. He was right. She found him in the quiet places of her heart, in every act of kindness, in every life she touched. One evening, Elena was at the soup kitchen, helping with the dinner service. The room was warm, filled with the murmur of conversations and the clatter of plates. She saw a familiar face, the old man she had helped that rainy evening, Mr. Henderson. He was no longer lost and despairing. He was volunteering, helping to clean tables, a quiet dignity in his posture. He caught her eye and offered a small, grateful smile. "Miss Vance," he said, walking over to her. "I wanted to thank you again. That night, you saved me. You showed me there was still hope." Eleanor smiled warmly. "You saved yourself, Mr. Henderson," she replied. "I just helped you see the path." "No," he insisted gently. "It was more than that. It was grace. You were an angel, Miss Vance, an angel in the rain." Elena felt a profound humility. An angel. She, who had once been so cold, so dismissive. It was a testament to the transformative power of compassion. As the evening drew to a close and the last of the guests departed, Elena stood in the quiet kitchen, a sense of deep peace settling over her. She had built her empire, yes, but not of glass and steel. She had built an empire of connection, of empathy, of shared humanity. She thought about the old woman from her past, the mother asking for food for her sick son, the woman she had so cruelly dismissed. Elena knew she could never truly apologize to her, could never undo that specific moment, but she had honored that memory. She had transformed its meaning into a driving force for good. The guilt was gone, replaced by a quiet, abiding peace. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't just something you received from others. It was something you earned through your actions, through your willingness to change, to embrace compassion, to open your heart. Her journey was far from over. There was always more to do, more lives to touch, more kindness to extend, but she was no longer adrift. She had found her true north, she had found her purpose, and she knew with a quiet certainty that she would continue to walk this path, guided by the unseen hand, forever changed. The legacy she was building wasn't just in the buildings she designed, but in the hearts she touched and the hope she inspired. And she wondered, with a sense of quiet anticipation, what new challenges, what new opportunities for grace tomorrow would bring. Years passed. Elena Vance remained at the helm of her architectural firm, but the empire she now oversaw was vastly different. It was no longer solely defined by towering skyscrapers and prestigious awards. It was known, renowned even, for its heart, for its unwavering commitment to designing spaces that nurtured communities, uplifted the vulnerable, and reflected the inherent dignity of every human being. Her mornings still began early, with strong coffee, but now her quiet contemplation often included reviewing plans for a new community garden or a proposal for affordable housing that integrated green spaces and sustainable living. Her assistant, Maya, now a senior partner, often joined her, their discussions filled with shared purpose and quiet camaraderie. Their work was no longer just about structures. It was about building lives. It was about creating environments where hope could truly flourish. Elena continued to volunteer at the soup kitchen, though her role had shifted. She was no longer just serving meals. She was a mentor, a fundraiser, a strategist. She helped secure funding, designed more efficient kitchen layouts, and developed programs that offered job training and educational opportunities to those seeking a fresh start. She saw familiar faces, people she had helped years ago, now thriving, giving back to the community themselves. They were living proof of the ripple effect of kindness. One afternoon, she visited a new community center her firm had designed. It was a bright, airy space, filled with laughter and activity. Children played in a sunlit courtyard. Adults learned new skills in brightly painted classrooms. In the common area, an elderly woman sat, reading quietly. Elena recognized her. It was the young mother she had picked up in the rain all those years ago, the one with the frail child. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting Elena's. A warm, grateful smile spread across her face. "Miss Vance," she said, her voice strong and clear, "thank you for everything. My son, he's thriving. He's in college now, because of the chance you gave us." Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion. The circle was truly closed. The ghost of the old woman from her past, the one she had turned away, was finally at peace. Her regret had transformed into a river of grace, flowing out into the lives of countless others. Elena's personal life also found a quiet richness. She cultivated friendships, nurtured relationships that were built on mutual respect and shared values. She traveled not for business, but to see the world with new eyes, to learn from different cultures, to find more ways to connect, to serve. She found joy in simple things: a sunset, a good book, a quiet conversation. The emptiness that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of belonging. The leather-bound journal she had received from the bookseller was now filled with her careful script. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a testament to the power of transformation, a quiet narrative of how one heart, once closed, had learned to open. She often reread its pages, not to dwell on the past, but to remember the journey, to honor the lessons learned. The bookseller. He remained a vivid, cherished memory. She never saw him again, not physically. The dusty bookstore still stood on the side street, a silent sentinel, but his presence was constant in her life. He was in every act of compassion she extended, every hand she offered, every space she designed with human dignity in mind. He was the gentle whisper that reminded her to always choose kindness, to always seek connection. He was the unseen hand that had guided her to her true purpose. Elena understood now that life was a continuous flow, a river. It wasn't about reaching a fixed destination and then stopping. It was about the journey itself, about how you navigated its currents, about the grace you extended along the way. Her past was not a burden she carried, but a wellspring from which her present purpose flowed. Her success was no longer measured by accolades, but by the lives she touched, the hope she ignited, the dignity she restored. She had learned that true strength wasn't in building walls, but in building bridges. Not in achieving individual triumph, but in fostering collective well-being, and that the most profound transformation often began with a single, quiet act of opening one's heart. Elena Vance, the architect of structures, had become the architect of hope. She continued her work, her life a living testament to the power of redemption, the beauty of compassion, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. She was at peace, she was complete, and she knew with every fiber of her being that the journey of grace, once started, never truly ends. It simply flows on, touching everything in its path, creating ripples of light in a world that always needs more. What would you do if this happened to you? If you believe this message is for someone, comment Amen. If you receive this message, type I receive it in the comments. Which city are you watching from?